Hey everybody, two Alpha Gals here. I'm Debbie Nichols.
And I'm Candace Mathis. And you're listening to In the Tall Grass, where we're sharing stories of reinvention, resilience, and rediscovering joy.
Whether it's facing Alpha Gal syndrome or any other redefining chapter of life, we all have to learn how to navigate the journey through the tall grass. So here we go. Hey everybody. We're here today with a new friend of ours, Charles Green. Charles is Deputy Commissioner with the Virginia Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services. And we had the pleasure of meeting Charles at the recent briefing that we did at the U.S. Capitol. So, hey, Charles, how are you?
Good afternoon. Doing great. It is great to see you all again.
Good to see you too. Thank you so much for being here with us today. If you don't mind just sharing with our listeners a little bit about yourself and what is it that you do?
Yeah. So again, I'm Charles. I'm Deputy Commissioner with the Virginia Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services, and that's my day job. In my personal life, I'm also a patient with alpha-gal syndrome. I got diagnosed with that about 2 years ago. And so have been navigating this strange food allergy kind of for the last 2 years.
All right. So first question with that, did you see a tick?
Yeah. So I will answer that directly and then indirectly. So the direct answer is I've seen a lot of ticks, but I do not recall the exact tick that bit me that set off the alpha-gal syndrome. And so I say that because I grew up and continue to, but ever since middle and high school, kind of working and playing outdoors. When I was growing up, I worked landscape in a summer job. I participated in the Youth Conservation Corps. I worked for the U.S. Forest Service in high school and college. I did some internships in land management with a paper company. And so I was outside a lot growing up, and exposure to ticks was nothing new. I would get bit every spring and summer. And now I have got a small family farm east of Richmond where I live in King William, Virginia. It's a farm that's been in my family for several generations, but the last several years I've been primary caretaker of this kind of family property. And so exposure to ticks there, again, also doing work outdoors, got a large garden there with my father that we enjoy, spending time together out there, but ticks are nothing new. And so I, up until a couple of years ago during the summer, really dressed for comfort, shorts and a t-shirt and, some old tennis shoes. I'd spray off something, with DEET in it or something like that to keep the bugs away. But I never really thought about tick bites too much. I was really more concerned about having a tick that would latch on and be embedded for 24 or 48 hours. Lyme's disease was something that I thought about. But that minimum time of attachment, I was really careful after I got done working to do a tick check and get any ticks off of me. But I didn't worry about, was I just bitten once and the tick moved on and that sort of thing. And since contracting alpha-gal, have kind of learned quite a bit about tick bites and, the likelihood that there is no minimum time of attachment for alpha-gal syndrome. So the short answer is I don't remember the exact tick, but I've had a lot of tick bites in my lifetime.
Yeah, it's funny. I think that was a mindset shift for all of us. I was vigilant about doing tick checks, especially on my kids, right? When they would play outdoors and come inside, we would do it. We figured we sort of had this 24-hour window, but like you said, that's not necessarily true when it comes to the Lone Star tick and alpha-gal syndrome. There's research that says that potentially just getting bit, you can contract it. And so not knowing exactly which tick might have given you alpha-gal syndrome, can we talk a little bit about your symptoms? How did you start to recognize that something wasn't right?
Yeah. So my case was really, the onset was dramatic and acute, which was I went out to the farm in King William 2 years ago in early spring to do some yard work out there. and I was late kind of getting up and getting there. So on the way there are no restaurants really around. And so I didn't pack a lunch, and I thought, well, I'll stop at the gas station, grab something for lunch, go and work there. And as it happened, I stopped at the gas station, gassed up, got a Gatorade and a gas station cheeseburger. And so I went, happily worked for, the entirety of the day, drove back home, and was kind of settling in after a shower, thinking about, okay, what am I going to eat for dinner and do this evening? When I had what subsequently I found out was a mild heart attack. So, onset with chest pain, just heart was racing, a lot of what felt like upper gastric pain, and luckily ended up going to the emergency room. And after a couple of initial tests came back normal, a blood test came back and it had elevated enzyme markers for a cardiac event. And they said, you're not going anywhere. So I spent the night in the hospital, got seen by the cardiologist, had a heart catheterization to look for any blockages. And of course, there were no major blockages found. It was sort of a mystery why somebody, who was under the age of 50 years old and relatively healthy would have sort of a sudden onset cardiac event like that. And so that started my series, kind of a summer long of mystery events, and several ER trips subsequent to that before I finally figured out what was going on.
Wow. I think just reading literature and all of these things over the past 5 years, we've read about the link between cardiac events and alpha-gal syndrome, but you are the first person that we've actually gotten to speak with directly that had this happen. So as you're talking, and Debbie and I can relate to this so much, just going through specialist visit after specialist visit to try to get to the answer of our symptoms, albeit ours were not as severe as yours, but it still took a long time for us to get a proper diagnosis. Can you share a little bit more about who you saw and then how you actually, got the diagnosis? Who put all of the puzzle pieces together? When did you figure out? I'm asking you like a million questions in one. When did you figure out kind of the link to the cheeseburger being an issue?
So I obviously started with a cardiologist because at first I thought, this is a cardiac event. I, have got to take care of my cardiac health. And so I was put on a whole slew of medicines, cardiac related medicines. So, beta blocker, calcium channel blocker, cholesterol, a statin, for cholesterol, and sort of radically changed my diet initially to try to deal with this. And I wasn't eating the healthiest diet before that, but I really did cut out almost all red meat and most dairy products to start out with. So, but that was just sort of happenstance. And then I was kind of okay for a week or two, but then symptoms started to come back. And I was having not just cardiac pain, but also a lot of GI distress. Felt kind of like an ulcer, a stomach ulcer that was, something kind of burning in my stomach. Would wake up in the middle of the night. Kind of the hallmark of my symptoms were I would wake up at 1:30 or 2 o'clock in the morning almost every night, and kind of heart was racing, chest was hurting, GI tract was kind of on fire. I'd get up, I'd be dizzy or lightheaded, and I'd kind of go, sometimes I'd go take a hot shower and just try to like get this to feeling to pass, or I'd do something else to sort of pass the time. And usually by 5 or 6 o'clock in the morning, about the time it was, time to get up and go to work, I'd start to feel a little bit better. get a cup of coffee, get dressed for work, still not feeling great, but good enough to make it. Then I'd come into work and kind of things would start all over again the next day. The issue I found, though, one of the things was that my symptoms seemed to start lasting kind of longer and longer into the next day and afternoon, and really kind of it took me about 5 to 6 months to get diagnosed. But by the time I was diagnosed, it was really almost full on 24 hours a day, every day, that this was happening, with very brief periods of relief. And I think those brief periods of relief really came because I was so nauseous, and food became so unappetizing to me a lot of the time that I stopped eating. Except for I was forcing myself to eat because I recognized, hey, I'm not really eating enough, and so I'd force myself to kind of eat, and then the kind of cycle would start over again.
All right. So after that 5 to 6 months, which must have been awful, if you're talking about all these symptoms, almost steady, that is a long time to deal with all of that. You were going to the cardiologist. Was it the cardiologist who diagnosed you?
No, so because I was having kind of a multitude of odd symptoms go on, I saw a few different specialists, and then also my primary care physician. And I should say, as far as blood work goes, I had my primary did some blood work because I was having some strange symptoms. And the only thing that really came back odd was that I had anemia, or that my ferritin level was low. And that was, completely unexplainable, something that I'd never had happen before. And so I started on an iron supplementation at that point in time. And unfortunately for me, the regular iron supplement is kind of hard on my stomach. So I started taking a bovine or cow-based derived blood, cow blood and cow liver, I think, supplement to raise my iron levels up. And it really was basically poisoning myself every day when I was taking this medication to deal with the this one odd test. But I was having really severe gastrointestinal issues, and I had decades ago had an ulcer that I had to have cauterized, and so I went back to a gastroenterologist. Had a number of GI tests, from an endoscopy, looking for a bleeding ulcer, to a gastric emptying study, because it really felt to me, it was kind of, every time I ate it, it sort of felt like things got stuck and it wasn't, going down smoothly, wasn't processing smoothly. I think part of that was just the amount of inflammation that was going on in my GI tract at the time. So I had a host of tests, and again, I was continuing to see the cardiologist, because the cardiac symptoms really weren't subsiding. I wasn't in an active heart attack all the time, but I did have kind of chest pain and cardiac pain a whole lot of the time. And so I had echocardiograms. I had a cardiac stress test. I wore one of those cardiac monitors for a few weeks. So I really had a battery of kind of medical tests leading up to diagnosis.
It just goes to show you how much we really have to go through, unfortunately, to get the right diagnosis. As I'm listening to you, I went through similar things. Like I said, I did not have a heart attack, but I was having heart palpitations in the middle of the night. Everything you mentioned, I had the exact same thing for months, and it's terrifying. And I can empathize so much with you. I'm just so sorry you had to deal with that. But once you get tested, it's like one simple blood test, and it could avoid the months of these unnecessary tests. Debbie had her gallbladder taken out. I think, did you have your gallbladder taken out too? Were you?
I did not, but I was very close, because the kind of the GI issues were unexplained, but the closest thing that we could come up with was that it's gallbladder attacks. And so I don't think the GI doctor was very satisfied with that. That was 100% the cause, but it was close enough that I was scheduled to have a gallbladder removal. And honestly, I've got to take some responsibility for this too, because I was so desperate. I was pushing to have anything done that might find resolution to the problems that kind of were going on. And so I was willing to undergo some pretty extreme, measures to just find some relief. And so I was scheduled for gallbladder removal, and luckily I had the blood tests and the results came back before that, and was able to, cancel everything and then focus on what the true issue was. But, dealing with the medical professionals, it was a challenge, and you probably experienced this as well, is, they've got very limited time to deal with you as a patient. You're there for 5, 10, maybe 15 minutes with them, and they need to move on to the next patient, and they want an answer to what it is that you came in for. And so it was very complicating to go in and see the cardiologist and describe and say, I'm having these cardiac issues, but I'm also having these, GI issues, and I'm also having this, I'm a lightheaded and whatnot. And kind of it muddies the water quite a bit. And I found my experience was either the specialist kind of wanted to ignore the other symptoms and not, well, that's not my specialty, so I'm not going to deal with that, or kind of maybe put it in a bucket that maybe you're just a little sensitive, or you're kind of making more out of the symptoms than they actually are.
Yeah.
Well, and I think like that was where I was going with my comment a few minutes ago, is that our hope is that eventually the more education that is, out there among the medical professionals, they can see, hey, this person comes in and has this symptom, this symptom, this symptom. Why don't we run this blood test to just rule out alpha-gal prior to sending them down this rabbit hole? Because I know exactly how you felt. It is when you don't know what's happening to you and you've had a terrifying event, you just want answers, and you will do whatever you have to do. But our hope is that more people will get tested and avoid all of that, I guess.
And I do think with informed medical providers, that's starting to happen in certain areas. I know I've got a friend who's a dermatologist here in Richmond, and we were discussing, after I got diagnosed with alpha-gal, I told him I finally figured out what it was that was going on with me. And I never had any skin reaction. So I never had hives or any of those types of things. But, he relayed in the last couple of summers that he's seeing, I think, a couple of cases a week of people coming in with unexplained rashes, unexplained skin conditions. And that one of his first courses of action is, if he really can't put his finger on what it is easily, send it out for a test for alpha-gal syndrome to see, and a surprising number are coming back positive. But it's, I think in the GI field, in the dermatological field, those are probably good practices, certainly in our region of the country.
Yeah, I think that's actually really reassuring to hear that you've got this friend who you can hear this from, that he's testing for alpha-gal before more extreme measures are taken. Because I think as the patient, as you were saying, as Candace was saying, we want to do whatever we can to find some relief from the symptoms. And so if it's changing your lifestyle, that's a whole lot easier than like going under the knife, right? Well, I say that not to, minimize the dramatic change it is to shift into an alpha-gal safe lifestyle.
So I will take a step back to one and say I was the one that requested the test. So, and I asked my primary, and I will say I have a great primary care physician, and she was really accommodating. And it wasn't the only test, but I remember sending her a message through the online portal and said, hey, I've got a couple of oddball tests. Can you run, would you be willing to order these tests? Some of these are it was sort of a Hail Mary last ditch effort. And the alpha-gal test was one of the ones that I included in there. And of course, it was the one that came back positive. So I would encourage, people, if you suspect that you are suffering from symptoms that might be alpha-gal, and you live in an area or you have had a lifestyle that exposes you to ticks, or you have had a tick bite, and suspect this is a possibility, even just to rule it out, I would ask your medical provider, hey, as we're trying to figure out what's going on with me, why not throw this in there and see if it, is positive or negative? It can't hurt. From what I understand, it's not that expensive of a test anymore. And so, I would ask for it.
That's great advice. And so the same thing happened to me, as you probably know. I had to ask for the test, right? And I think there was a study out of North Carolina that actually said that I think that's the majority, or it was back when the study was published, the majority of people being diagnosed with alpha-gal syndrome, it was very much patient driven, people asking their providers for the test. So that's great that your provider was willing to listen and accommodate you and explore some other options that maybe they hadn't thought of. And your test actually came back positive, correct? Like you said you had an actual positive test.
It did. My alpha-gal IgE level has always been very low. I think my initial test, it came back in August the 2nd or 4th of 2022. I think it was only 1.15. So, pretty low test compared to some of the other numbers I've seen for people. But I don't know that has a great correlation with what your symptoms are and what the severity can be. So, for me, positive was positive. And I will also say, so my primary care physician, advised me of the positive test. She is not a specialist, she's not an allergist, not a specialist in alpha-gal. And so her advice was, it's a positive test result, not sure of the clinical significance. You really need to look for a specialist. And so I was lucky enough after that initial test to pretty quickly get in to see an allergist at the University of Virginia. They are well known for their work in the alpha-gal space. So I got in to see them and had some additional testing. And this goes back to a comment I may have made earlier, which was, going into this, I thought of alpha-gal as the red meat allergy. And so between the time my test came back positive from my primary care physician and I went to see an allergist, I cut out all red meat, but I really didn't do a lot of research because I thought that's the only thing I needed to do. And I was still having symptoms in those weeks to, maybe 3-4 weeks, something like that. Follow-up testing showed, I've got dairy sensitivity because of alpha-gal syndrome, and likely had possibility of sensitivity to other things like gelatin or other animal or mammal derivatives that could be in certain products. So that really and that's really what turned things around for me. Was I went cold turkey on anything, any ingredient or any derivative that could have originated from a mammal, and kind of started from there.
Which
okay.
Is great. Sorry, I just want to ask, Charles, from that point, when you cut out everything cold turkey, did your symptoms completely resolve? Like, how soon did you start to feel better?
So not immediately. I got as a gift, I got I think it was called the 90-day symptom tracker, or like the 90-day symptom alpha-gal symptom tracker kind of. It was a notebook. And you don't need a special book for this. You could just use a notebook. But really, I started writing down everything that I put in or on my body every day. And so it has items on there for food items, medication, and kind of toiletries, or those sorts of things. And I would just write down what I was consuming, what I was using, and then what symptoms I may have had. And if I had symptoms, or if I didn't feel well, I could look back and see, okay, what happened 6 hours ago, 4 hours ago, 8 hours ago that might have set this off. I will say, I think because I spent 5 months really sort of poisoning myself allergic reaction wise with the iron supplement, and then what I was eating, my body was really, my allergic response system was really kind of hyped up. And so when I first got diagnosed and went cold turkey on all things, I was having some sensitivities to other items that do not contain alpha gal. And this certainly was not full blown allergic reactions, but it might have been just a little bit of nausea or some other things. And really, when I look at them, they were kind of high histamine foods or histamine liberating foods or things like that. That until my entire body sort of calmed down, I was a little bit sensitive to. And overall, it took probably a good 6-7 weeks for everything to calm down. But after a month and a half or 2 months, I went back and, before alpha gal syndrome, I was a huge coffee drinker. I had to take a little bit, tone it down a little bit at the beginning, but I'm back to being a huge coffee drinker again. And those sorts of things. That type of stuff does not bother me anymore.
That's great to hear too, because I think it's hard to think about cutting out just red meat. It's even harder to think about cutting out those additional byproducts. And we hear this so much. So I'm so glad that you're addressing it. You have to start thinking about those other things that might just be triggering your system, right? And cutting those out, and that maybe those are temporary and you'll be able to add them back in once you get your sort of whole self under control. So you gave up all those things. You've added back some of the things that are not mammal byproducts. How about fume reactions? Do you react to fumes at all?
I do not. I am lucky. Do not. In fact, I love the smell of cooking red meat. Does not bother me at all. Makes me hungry. I just know that I can't have any.
Right.
So I am fortunate, and I do sympathize with anyone who experiences that as one of their symptoms.
What has been the hardest thing to give up, to adjust to? Is there something that you can name that you find that you miss?
Honestly, I think dairy has been really, really challenging for me. I love dairy products. I miss the milk. I miss the cheese. But there are so many products that dairy is used in, as either as a filler or as a additional ingredient or something like that. And so it's challenging to find products that are dairy free. I think the other thing is not just how difficult it is or what are you missing eating. I think the other challenge is just a lifestyle challenge, because I both for work and for personal reasons love to travel. Have been fortunate to travel quite a bit nationally and internationally, and so one of the joys I have had about traveling was I love to try different foods from different places, different cultures, different backgrounds. I've never been a picky eater. I love to try everything, and I love to try to eat authentic to the place that I'm visiting. And for me, I think that has been one of the more challenging things, is just the day-to-day coming into the office. Great. I do meal prep at the beginning of the week. I use those lunches or dinners throughout the week. That's pretty easy. But it's hey, I'm going to pick up and I've got to go to New Orleans for something. What am I going to do about eating there? or I mentioned, I got diagnosed the beginning of August 2022, and I had a trip planned in October of that year to Mexico, and it wasn't, this wasn't a vacation; it was a work trip. It was not a resort area; it was city and interior Mexico, and I kind of that was one of the worries: is what am I going to do for eating in this place? I'm fluent in Spanish, so it's fortunate. I can read the labels. I can, of things that I buy. I can communicate with restaurant staff if I go to a restaurant. But that caused a bit of stress as to how am I going to navigate this, and then also what do I do, because I was fresh off some of the kind of severe reactions, and over the course of those 5 or 6 months, I'd gone back to the ER emergency room 3 or 4 times. And I just thought, what am I going to do if I'm in a foreign country and have a medical emergency? That kind of was a stress point, but I got through that. And, traveling's not quite as challenging, although it still takes planning. I still think, okay, what snack items am I going to bring with myself? And then usually do research and look and say, okay, can I find some restaurants close to my hotel or where I'm staying that are either vegan or have got options that look like they would be safe for me? And then the last thing is, do I also have a setup where I could cook for myself if I want to or need to? And so, how do I make accommodations for that as well?
I love that. And can I just ask you, so Debbie and I are now plant-based. I've been plant-based for 3 years almost. And I also was a big meat eater prior to diagnosis. And I know, you loved steak and hamburgers and all of those things. Is there anything that shocked you that you really do enjoy now that maybe you wouldn't have tried prior to diagnosis? I know you mentioned a vegan restaurant. Had you gone to those places prior?
No. I would not have picked out a vegan restaurant to go eat, but I will say, I have definitely found some places, both here in Richmond and then around the country where I've traveled that really have some good and tasty options. So I'm not strictly plant based, right. But that is something I do. I recently was in New Orleans, and I found a block away from my hotel was a great vegan bakery that was open in the kind of bakery and coffee shop, and they had a plant-based sausage and kind of biscuit in the morning. It was great. Fulfilled the dietary requirements, tasted good, and I got my caffeine in the morning, and I was good to go. But I have tried out, and I've even convinced some friends to go out and hey, if we're going out for dinner, let's try this. Let's try this restaurant. It wouldn't normally be something they try, but they've gone along with, and it's been an enjoyable time.
So then you must have your friends and family must be pretty supportive of you to be able to shift like that and to be able to try some new places so that you can go to, so that you can enjoy a time of like a social outing with them.
Yeah, I think that is definitely an important thing to have, is a support network around you of people who understand what's going on health wise with you, are supportive of you, and then also willing to listen and educate themselves too, to what your particular situation is. So I've found that to be the case. We've gotten together family events in the last couple of years, and there are always questions about, okay, well, I'm going to prepare this with these ingredients. Is that going to be safe for you? And a lot of times, of course, I'll volunteer to bring certain things as well. And I would never impose my own dietary issues on other people at a gathering. But it's nice to have people around you who are supportive and want to make sure there are some dishes or snacks or some things there that you can eat without a problem.
Yeah, it's huge. I mean, I think it's been for both of us, we can relate with that. We love to cook and we love to spend time, with our family and friends. And when you feel supported and, people are willing to either try the dish that you bring or prepare something that's safe. I mean, I think just as humans, we want to have those interactions and experiences, and we don't want that to stop. And I love your outlook. I think I'm sitting here listening to everything you're saying. And Debbie, I'm like, oh my gosh, we need to have Charles back on so we can just talk about traveling.
Right.
Maybe we could do that with you, because I think that's it. We get asked all the time and we both love to travel. But you seem to have some really good insight into traveling abroad, which I have not really had to do. I've done it once, but anyways, we'll have to maybe dive into that again. So
yeah, we'd love to.
yeah, I know. I'm like, I love traveling. So I think we would really love to know a little bit more. Just, you have such a unique perspective, I think, dealing with this personally, but also professionally. Can you just share? I know we talked about this before we hit record, but can you share a little bit more about how Alpha-Gal, has not only affected your life, but how it's affecting the farming and rural communities that you serve within your profession, and kind of how that shifted, your perspective over the past couple of years?
Yeah. So I think I do have a unique perspective and concern related to Alpha-Gal, uh, partially because of the work that I do. So in my work, the primary constituent base that I work with, working for the Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services, are the farmers and rural citizens. And because they are farmers and rural citizens and out in the rural areas of Virginia, that's the population that is most exposed to the Lone Star tick, and that's the population that is being impacted the most as both as the geography or geographic area where the Lone Star tick is found kind of increases, but then also as the number of cases seem to rise. And so I think I've got a concern for that constituency, one, from an individual health impact on those farmers or those rural citizens, and kind of do they have access to medical providers who are knowledgeable about alpha-gal syndrome, are diagnosing them quickly, are giving them good advice about what to do and not to do, and just good resources for those folks. The other thing we talked about was, I went through a battery of medical tests while I was trying to figure out what was going on with me. I'm really fortunate that I've got very good health insurance that my employer provides to us. So while my out-of-pocket costs, I had, I think, probably several $1,000s in out-of-pocket cost in medical tests. The true cost of those medical tests that was covered by the insurance provider, I don't even know what that is, but it was astronomical, I am sure, because those are not cheap medical tests to undergo. And so that, I also have a concern for the financial well-being of farmers and rural constituents who may not have access to the same healthcare resources. They may be self-insured for medical and health insurance, and so the individual kind of cost to them might be quite considerably more. And then the last thing is just, and this is particularly to those livestock producers, but those folks work with animals in their day-to-day business. Alpha-Gal, hasn't been the case with me, but I understand some people have sensitivities to actually being in contact with mammals. And so how does that impact those people whose livelihood depends on being able to work with animals, being exposed to, animal bodies, animal secretions, and animal products in their workplace. And then the last thing is just the marketability and the long-term kind of market impact potential that if a certain portion of the population in this country becomes allergic to mammal-derived protein and derivatives, what impact might that have on the market for such products? And so, that's kind of a little bit more far-fetched concern, but I think something that in the back of my head, I think of well, how many cases of alpha-gal are there actually in the United States? How many will there be 10 years from now? And then also how sensitive are people who have this syndrome? I didn't mention before. So I'm not the only person in my family that has alpha-gal or has tested positive for alpha-gal. One of my parents also tested positive, but that parent does not appear to have severe symptoms, has not changed their diet, hasn't changed their lifestyle, and their IgE level is higher than mine is. So, it's kind of one of these oddities, but I think as more information becomes available and more research is done, the medical community and others will have better information to work with.
Gosh, I couldn't have said that better. You addressed so many important things in that just in answering that question. I think, addressing, educating this underrepresented, underdiagnosed, overexposed communities, I think that is going to become a huge priority for the alpha-gal community. And I love hearing it from you because you do have this sort of unique perspective given your profession. And again, I'm so glad that you talked a little bit about the IgE numbers too. People ask us all the time about the relationship between symptoms and IgE level, from the alpha-gal test. And, what we've noticed is that we can't identify a correlation between how bad you're going to have alpha-gal and what your numbers are. For example, mine right now is 0. I've been testing 0 for the last, I don't know, 2 years or so. My PCP is great, and she always will add the alpha-gal test in when I get my other tests. But I am still anaphylactic, to meat and dairy at least. So I'm glad that you mentioned that too. I'm curious too about what is going to happen to the agriculture industry, to I guess to like animal farming in particular, when the numbers continue to grow the way that they're growing now, right? We're hearing about exponential growth of alpha-gal. So, if in Virginia, parts of Virginia, the highest prevalent areas, we're talking 3% of the population, where is that going to go? And do we need to start thinking about, you know, gal safe cows? I think, already we've talked some on other podcasts and other situations about, needing the gal-safe pig, for example, for heart valves and pharmaceuticals and things like that. So I'm very curious to see how the pharmaceutical and therapeutic industry responds as we get a better idea of the true prevalence of alpha-gal syndrome.
Yeah, I mean, I hate to speculate. I think as far as kind of the marketability of livestock, probably a long way off from any market impact there. But I do think there's probably a better possibility of impact or traction with labeling of certain products and both food labeling and pharmaceutical labeling that may come about as there is more solid evidence of the number of cases or adverse reactions reported that are traced back to, X inert ingredient in this medication. And to me, I think that is, from a consumer, that's one of the things. I've become an expert label reader, like I'm sure everyone with alpha-gal has, reading food labels. But there are, on the pharmaceutical side of things, it's very difficult to kind of decipher, is there an animal-derived ingredient in this pharmaceutical product? And then the other thing is, even on the food products, is there's great job listing the top allergens, pretty clearly on products. But at what point does alpha gal, or is there proof that alpha gal is one of those top 6, 7, 8, 9, most prevalent allergies, and that it gets added in to the label of allergens on food products?
Yeah, it's a huge concern. I mean, you're touching on all of the things. If listening that might not have alpha gal syndrome, this is the complex onion that we have to, pull away all these layers. And I think the pharmaceutical, the challenge with pharmaceuticals is probably one of the most terrifying things if you really sit and think about it. I'm sure, gosh, you probably were receiving life-saving medication that
had, and that's one of the things I think about when having the heart attack that kind of kicked this off, or the non-STEMI cardiac event, was the first thing I got was a blood thinner. And I have not gone back and kind of looked at the medical records and seen, was it heparin? Was it, what clot busting or blood thinning product was it? But, being 2 years out, that's one of the things I think about and think, wow, that could have been even worse if I had gotten a direct, intravenous injection of something that was derived from a mammal and meant to save me, but actually ended up furthering an anaphylactic reaction.
Yeah. Right. And speaking of reactions, how long has it been since you've had a reaction?
So I have been really fortunate to not have a severe reaction, definitely in a long time. The last reaction I had was actually to carrageenan, and that was a product which I wasn't sure whether I was allergic to or not, or would have a reaction to or not. Just had avoided it, and it just so happened that I was getting ready to go on a trip somewhere and was running out of the normal toothpaste that I use. And so I had a coupon at a particular pharmacy, went there. They didn't have the toothpaste that I have been using and know works for me. And they had a certified vegan toothpaste. And because it was certified vegan, I didn't even look at the ingredients. I just picked a couple tubes off, took it with me. And then I, throughout my travels, I kind of wasn't feeling great, was starting to have a little bit of kind of cardiac pain. Again, it's just some of the GI symptoms. Again, not horrible, kind of mild to moderate. And I chalked it up, since I was traveling and eating out, that, hey, maybe there was some cross-contamination going on or whatever. But I got back home, and it kind of continued on for the next 4 or 5 days. I said, there's got to be something that I'm doing that is doing this. And when I stopped and sort of diagnosed and went kind of meal by meal and step by step in my day, I picked up the toothpaste and looked at the back, and I was like, oh, that must be what it is. Cut it out, and a day later felt great again. So
yeah, that's a sneaky one.
It is.
That was the last things I realized. It was in my toothpaste 2 years ago, but it makes my tongue swell. I have a terrible reaction to carrageenan. Bad stuff. So yeah, anybody that is looking at certified vegan products, definitely keep that one on your radar, because it is a sneaky one in those products for sure. Glad it didn't result in a use of an EpiPen for you.
No, very good. I have been fortunate in the 2 years since diagnosis. I've carry my EpiPens, but I have not had to use them at all. So have used some Allegra 24, have used some other allergy medicines. Early on, I did have some liquid steroids kind of thing, and use that a time or two to kind of tamp down a little bit of a reaction. But very fortunate that I have not had an anaphylactic reaction and needed to use EpiPen.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, we definitely don't want you having to do that.
No.
I mean, if you need it, use it. We always tell people, just do it if you need to. But we're glad some people don't have to.
Exactly. Exactly. Charles, now that you are somewhat of an expert on AGS, and I can say that with confidence after seeing you present at the US Capitol and talking to you today, what advice would you give to someone who was recently diagnosed with alpha-gal, or someone maybe who was diagnosed but continues to struggle with their diagnosis?
I think one of the first things is find a competent medical professional that you trust, and is vested in your health. And for me, that, I mentioned my primary care physician, which is great, but I've also found a local allergist who is just wonderful to deal with. Um, you know, it's clear when I meet with her that she is up on the current literature. She's reading the scientific articles. She's reading the general news media things on alpha-gal, is knowledgeable about it, also cares about, how I'm doing, ask questions about any reactions I've had, or, how have you been feeling since last time? Is there anything? Ask me what things I would like to talk about. And I think really takes the time to listen and kind of jointly make decisions on what I either want to do or not do. So I think having someone like that, and I think also I went to see her when I was first diagnosed, and really kind of in a bad state of mind about what it was that was happening. Because I think, when I first got diagnosed, the first thing I felt was relief, that at least I knew what was going on. But that was really quickly replaced by sort of denial, or, denial and anger at the situation that was going on. And then I guess an overwhelming sense that I need to do something. I've got to do something to fix this, because this isn't me. I'm not supposed to be this person. I'm not supposed to have this food allergy. I'm the guy that likes to travel around and eat food, from wherever I'm going. And this is not supposed to be who this is happening to. And one of the most important things she said to me was, you cannot become alpha-gal. And by that, I think she meant, you cannot let this take over your life. You can't let it become your identity. You've really, you're going to be a person that has to deal with it, but you don't want it to become who you are, and the only thing you are. So it's going to be a component of you, but you really need to revert back to the person you were before, and then figure out how to deal with this, but not let it overwhelm your life. So I think that's the first thing, is kind of finding that a trusted medical professional or professionals that you can deal with. The other thing we talk about is kind of family, friends, support, group. I think that is definitely important to have that. Hopefully you have that, or you can find those. And those can be, I think, both in person, or there are virtual, groups. There are also, I don't know whether to call you all coaches. They're trusted sources of information, and also resources or support resources that you can utilize. I will say, my opinion is, be careful about what you read online, however, or what you see on social media. One of the things that, I've reminded myself about is there's a lot of good information online, but there's also a lot of not so great information online. And depending on the platform that you may be looking at information on, you may also want to realize that if you're looking at information on an online support group for people with a particular condition, alpha-gal in this case, the people that tend to hang around in that support group are the ones who are kind of the worst cases for the condition. And so don't scare yourself just because all of the information you see is kind of worst case scenario, the worst possible thing that can happen to you, or the most sensitive people that are out there. It really is a spectrum of issues. And, I think just take everything like that with a grain of salt.
Oh, such great advice. Such
Yeah.
great advice. It makes me think of Dr. Cummins' quote. He said, Alpha Gal, if nothing else, is consistently inconsistent. And so to hear you make that comment about social media, I think is fantastic because people need to take it, like you said, with a grain of salt. So thank you for sharing that. I think great advice.
Yes, absolutely. And so we're going to wrap this with our hardest question.
Oh, no, no, no.
Well, so we hear. We are huge music lovers. If you don't know, music's been like a huge part of our lives. So we like to end our podcast asking all of our guests what song in this moment or for all time brings you the most joy. And it can be a song, an artist. You know, we like to expand it a little bit if you have a hard time narrowing it down, but what brings you joy in music?
Yeah. So I am going to give an Alpha Gal appropriate answer to this. Uh, if you looked at my playlist on iTunes, you'd probably think I was schizophrenic or something, just because of the wide range of artists and time periods that it covers and genres. But I'm a huge kind of classic rock fan, and I think I have said online that I am the Jim Morrison or the Lizard King of food allergies. So I will pick for my song "Backdoor Man" by The Doors, for the line that says, "You men eat your chicken, eat your dinner, eat your pork and beans. I eat more chicken than any man ever seen."
That's fantastic.
Oh, that's so appropriate. Did you like the song prior to your diagnosis?
Yeah, I like The Doors. I'm a like I said, I like music from the '60s, and my playlist is everything from, good grief, probably like the Grateful Dead to Run DMC. So
Yes. See, this is why we all connected. We're
Yep. You're in real good company. That's how we feel about our own playlist. Depends on the day, depends on the mood. Sometimes it's the Beach Boys, sometimes it's Guns N' Roses, like who knows?
Oh, I love it. Well, thank you, Charles, so much for talking with us today. I hope that we can revisit conversation maybe about travel in the near future.
Yeah, it would be great. I've got a trip coming up to Central America for fun this summer. May have a trip to South America in the fall. So
yeah,
very interested to see kind of how I accommodate on those trips. But I'm looking forward to it and would love to revisit that with you all as well.
Yeah, you'll have to take some notes and report back.
Yep. Yeah. And thank you again for taking the time to talk with us.
Glad to see you all. Yeah.
Until next time. Thank you for joining us today on In the Tall Grass. Visit us at 2alphagals.com. That's TWO alphagals.com. Or you can find us on Instagram and Facebook at 2alphagals. If you enjoyed listening, please leave a review and help us grow this community.
We're all faced with obstacles on our journey, whether it be food allergies or tick-borne diseases. You might outgrow the reactions, but you won't outgrow the person you become. Ticks suck, but life doesn't have to.